Okay, so I believe I'm live. So welcome back. Hope you had a great networking session or a coffee, tea, whatever it was you managed to make the most of. So yes, welcome back. As you may have noticed, I'm not Tim, but don't worry, he will be back soon. So I am Terri McNerney, and I'm going to introduce the next session, which is realigning our organisation to meet changing business needs. So I'm delighted that I'm going to be hosting a panel of 4 great leaders who are going to be sharing their stories. And so I am from Inspire the Best. I'm delighted to say a partner with Business Cultures Awards. And here we have the 4 panelists. So welcome, lovely to see you again. So maybe to get started, we could do a quick introduction. I'll go clockwise in my screen. So Stephen, would you like to do a quick intro?
Thanks, Terri. Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Cochran. I'm Head of Products at AIB UK, Allied Irish Bank. So Head of Products and Customer Advocacy, and I'm Executive Sponsor of our Culture Transformation Programme that we've been running for the last few years, and we're going to talk about more about today. Yes, delighted to be with you today.
Excellent. Welcome. Thank you, Stephen. Aggie.
Hi, everyone. Similar to Steve, very, very happy and delighted to be here. So thanks for having me. I wear 2 hats mainly. So on one hand, I'm a group people director for an organisation called Argent Foods. And previously to that, I have led people teams for McDonald's, Tesco, and other well-known organisations. And then my other hat is that I lead a diversity and inclusion consultancy called Mahogany Inclusion Consultants. So speaking about change and the change agenda is something that I do pretty much every day. So really looking forward to the session.
It sounds like it. Thank you, Aggie. Okay, Liz, let's hear from you.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. My name's Liz Pannaman. I'm an organisational development specialist at Transport for London, where I've worked for 6 years, and we won a Business Culture Award a couple of years ago, I think now. I've worked for 30 years across the private and public sector in both organisational development and leadership roles, and as an HR generalist. I suppose the last 10 years I've focused on leadership development, coaching and mentoring. That's my specialism, I suppose.
Wonderful. Well, very welcome, Liz. Thank you. Good you're here. And Paul, last but not least.
Thanks, Terri. Afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the invite. So I'm Paul Irons. I'm Head of Business Operations and Support for Sanofi. Sanofi is the 6th largest pharmaceutical company in the UK. And the project I've been working on is transforming our go-to-market business model from a traditional sales focus to more of a key account approach, and how we inspire excellence with that approach.
Brilliant, thank you. So welcome all. We've got a nice diverse mixture of people here from different types of industries and different roles. So I'm sure we'll have some very different answers. So the first question I'd like to ask, I'm really curious about, is given the current challenging times, as we all know, what have been some of the more positive drivers for change that you have found that have influenced the way you've reorganised your strategy, realigned? Let's maybe start with Aggie.
No problem. I'm going to speak in my people director role, and I will say that the positive drivers of change have been firstly around urgency. So I think the fact that there was urgency certainly around COVID meant that people had to make decisions and had to make them quite quickly. And with that came a lot of devolvement of accountability. So whereas traditionally and in the past, leadership roles would have made a lot of the decisions, the fact that there was that urgency, it meant that they had to let go and allow those decisions to be made down the line, which is a beautiful thing. And if you, I'm sure most of us on the call will agree, that's what should probably happen all the time anyway. I think also that piece around being vulnerable and not knowing all the answers, a lot of leadership teams found themselves in that place where we had this new thing in front of us that nobody really understood. We didn't know what was going to happen. So there was that vulnerability, which again, I think allowed for more open decision making, but also more, I guess, crowdsourcing of ideas and views and how to progress together.
Can I stop you there then? Because I just hear from a few different people, but you've got oodles of great insights there. So thank you, Aggie. Paul, maybe a quick answer from you.
Yeah, absolutely. As an organisation, our main customer is the NHS, and working with the NHS at a time of pandemic is interesting, shall we say. So what's carried us through is actually having a very clear vision as an organisation of what it is we are doing and really understanding our why. And why do we do what we do? We've had to look at our short-term goals. Are they still relevant? And if not, adapt them. How can we do this? This is all about having trust in our own organisation. And I think Aggie also said, it's not about knowing all of the answers. So from our perspective, it is really listening to the organisation and also being willing to make mistakes and actually learn from those mistakes. So it's a culture of bringing the organisation together to meet the needs of the customer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. So two very great answers there with different takes on things. So Stephen, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, picking up on what Paul said there, I mean, I think the most positive catalyst for us was the energy of our staff. And there's a real staff energy and commitment to change. And I think a particular focus around our customer. So that really was the driver. And it was it's always been a natural driver for our organisation, but it was really, really badly damaged in the last financial crisis when banks were the problem rather than the solution.
Yeah.
And it's kind of come full circle now in that, you know, banks have been very much part of the solution now in providing consumers with repayment holidays and government support schemes and, you know, everything else from mobile banking to manning call centres and keeping branches open. So I think that positive driver has definitely come through that energy of staff and commitment to our customers, you know, quite genuinely so.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I can see the big shift from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. Brilliant. Liz?
Yeah, thank you. I build on things that Aggie said. I think we recognise a lot of that in terms of urgency, and I think the watch phrase of the last few months has just been "do the right thing." We're a very traditional, rules-bound organisation, and while all that stood us in good stead, it was the innovation, the urgency, the amount of stuff that we got done that would have taken years, you know, building cycleways, building, I think 17,000 increase in pedestrian ways, you know, but also I think the care and compassion, because obviously we have a lot of frontline staff that are really, you know, keeping the network going, and we are all very proud of the role we play in London, and I think that's seen us through, that passion and that togetherness. But yeah, the do the right thing has been, I think, our key driver of that change.
Yeah, and you know, you're all on the front line in very different ways, aren't you, with the NHS and with Transport for London and the banks and then the food industry. So all very different aspects of it. So I'll go back to Steve. Wondering, Steve, how did you ensure that you engaged all the levels of the organisation in this process? Oh, are you on mute?
Sorry, schoolboy error, straight at the start. Yes, it's really important right from the outset. To obviously the top of the organisation is really important, so the tone from the top needs to be right. But you can't go anywhere without having the whole organisation engaged. And we started with workshops really from the lowest level upwards, and got as many people involved as we possibly could in very informal sessions, using a little bit of technology, but small groups, larger groups, and iterating from there. And that really helped. And then getting that to meet in the middle, with the top of the organisation at certain points. And I say it's definitely an iterative process, but it has to involve all levels of the organisation. There's no doubt about
that. Thanks very much, Steve. How about you, Liz? What have you found?
Yeah, I would agree with that with Stephen. We did a lot of work on workshops and leading from the top. The leaders were on stage, literally sometimes they were front and centre for all of it. But we also really worked hard right from the beginning to build in all our stakeholders and our users, so particularly operational staff. We gave them, if we spotted talent, they became advocates, champions, facilitators. We trained them to be licensed users for the psychometric tool that we used in our change program. So we gave them the jobs that we usually keep for HR, all that sexy stuff. So we gave them out, and it really empowered them not to just be participants, but to be equal partners. It was a very complex change program that we were going through with our station staff, and we did it in collaboration with other departments, and again, very collaborative, IT, finance, but also our external user groups, particularly our disabled transport user groups, brought them in, and they said difficult stuff, but that was the reality. We didn't gloss over that. So yeah, I think it's build it in right from the beginning, how you do that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Liz. And Paul, what would be your take on this?
Right at the beginning of the process, I was introduced to the appreciative inquiry, which was a tool that was fantastic to allow us to get a representative set of views from across the organisation. Very much as Stephen and Liz has said, we focused on 3 different areas. We focused on our individual contributors, we focused on our account teams, and we focused on our leadership team. All 3 of those groups have slightly different needs. But we've also found, as you go through change, a lot of people want to understand, what does good actually look like in the new world? So we spent a lot of time focusing on an excellence framework, and we've really needed to keep that conversation going, and getting peer-to-peer engagement has helped to drive that change through. And that impact of peer-to-peer is so powerful.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. Yeah, so lots of different things there, really. Certainly lots of workshops and sort of informal gatherings, but setting the tone from the top, and having the top and the bottom meeting in the middle, or integrating across all the different levels, and working on the stakeholders as well, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But distributing the HR role across all the different parts of the organisation as well. And appreciative inquiry, I'm a big fan of appreciative inquiry. I use it a lot. So it is a great tool for building on the best of the past to create a positive future. So a great example of that in action. So thank you. So start with Aggie this time. And I'm wondering how you went about generating the necessary energy and commitment that you need to keep this change going. Oh, Mike, yes.
Yeah, so I would say that the first thing is about creating that bigger picture, that story, that outcome, that why, and being very crystal clear around what the future position will look like, why it's great for the organization, why it's great for all the stakeholders, and then also bringing that down to when you're talking about the commitment in the organization, why is that great for every single person? So what's in it for me? And then setting the intention around that, and then involving everybody within the organization, pretty much as we were spoken about in the last question, really, in that decision making, in that shaping of things, and even sometimes if you can't do a lot of that, at least in that feedback piece as well. So engaging them in that as well. I would also add short-term wins. So try to get some short-term wins that you can celebrate relatively quickly, and bring everybody in on that journey with that celebration as well, because that will engender commitment and stamina, and hopefully spur them on to carry on with you on the journey.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aggie.
You're welcome.
Stephen, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long journey. So it's really important to, I think, be realistic from the outset about the time that it's going to take you to go on the journey. So, you know, it's probably 3 years, and I would say we're probably now in our second cycle there, which is not about starting again, but it's really on building what's happened in the previous 3 years. But I think being persistent, being really clear, and having lots of regular communication. But we've got a fantastic HR team, and the HR team are really, really central to a change program like this. But an HR team can't do it in isolation, and they always had the kind of focus on all the different steps that you needed to go through, and keeping us aligned to that and on that path as we went through it, and supporting the organisation as it went through it, but allowing the front line of the business to lead it as it needed to.
Thank you, Steve. Great. And Liz, what about you?
Yes, it's reassuring to hear from Aggie and Steve that, yeah, those are the things that we did as well. But I think we also, there's Stephen's point about realism is that we had a big 3-year program, and we probably, even in that time, we were dealing with some systemic, very hardwired stuff. And we often said we may not get from A to Z, we may get to A to D, and then the next phase will be that, you know. And I think it's also recognizing that you won't necessarily hit it all first time, and that we are going back and doing it, and you have to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you know, look at some of the stuff again, particularly, you know, let's say in a very traditional organisation, and some of that's hardwired, and how do you go back? And it's iterative. I think that's the point.
Yeah, it's not all done in one big step. No, absolutely not. Liz, so that's you. Sorry, my notes here. So a quick summary of that then. It sounds like that there's it's really that whole way of involving everyone in the decisions, getting everyone involved from the start, but the energy and having a clear vision and aligning everyone around what you're doing, and then the small steps so that it's an iterative process, an emergent change sort of thing, isn't it, where it keeps happening again and again, and you learn something and you build on it and you build on it and you build on it. But it's a long journey, and you have to be realistic about what you can achieve each day. Okay, so moving on a little bit to the customer and consumer, and we talked about key stakeholders a bit earlier on, but what did you do to make sure you involved the key stakeholders, the customer's voice, in the changes that were happening? Paul?
I've already mentioned our key stakeholders are the NHS, and we can watch the news today and we can see that the NHS changes day by day. That's nothing new. We've seen that historically. So for us, we really need to stay on top of our customer and account insights, which means we need to have a flow that comes back into the organisation. And this has to start at the bottom with the individual through to the account teams, then to bring it back into the head office. If we do this well, this means that we can then shape our organisational strategy and tweak it to make sure we maximise the opportunity that exists, not only for Sanofi, but also for the NHS, and look for that common goal between the two. And if we get that right, it will not only be a win for Sanofi, it will be a win for the NHS, but more importantly, a win for the patient that will receive the medicine at the end of the day, as they are the consumer.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much, Paul. Great example. Stephen?
Yeah, so I think having a role at a senior level is really important, that effectively is charged with leading that customer insight and listening to the customer and bringing that into everyday decision making and discussion. But the stuff that Paul mentioned is really important about actually gathering the insight from customers and then analysing it and reacting to it and using that as the tool for making changes. So we just did a bit of a look back exercise about the supports that we put in place for customers through COVID, and the first report came in for a group of customers. It was really, really good. It was great. So we felt fantastic. And then 10 days later, another group of customers, it wasn't quite so good. So you've got to take the rough with the smooth and then be able to do more of the bits that you get told you're doing well, but you've also got to listen to the bad bits as well and then make those changes, I think.
Yeah, so sort of take a deep breath and learn from it and move on. But yeah. Okay, thanks very much, Steve. Aggie, how did you involve the voice of the customer?
Hi, the organisation I work in is a B2B. So it's quite interesting in terms of that obvious customer feedback that you usually have in a B2C is not quite there. But interestingly, similarly to what Stephen and Paul have said, it is about understanding those customer insights. And while you may not be able to have the customer feedback directly, ensuring that you have the person around the table who understands the customer feedback. So whether it's the relationship managers with the clients, or if it's the people who manage the call center, etc., making sure that you have that feedback baked in. And then it is that piece as well, just thinking about, I think it was Paul, may have been Stephen, one of the lovely gentlemen, someone talked about having that win-win piece, isn't it? What is the win-win for the organisation and also for the customer? What's important to them and what's also important to us, and then ensuring that they meet within that as well.
Yeah, I think it was Paul, and actually it was a win-win-win, wasn't it? It was like the NHS, Sanofi, and the patients. So,
even better.
So a nice combination, even better. Okay. So how do you make sure then, the next question is about sustaining things? And I think, Aggie, I saw you in a post earlier on saying something about baking it in or some such phrase. So how do you sustain the change and make sure it sticks and stays around and is part of the way you do things all the time? So maybe, Aggie, you'd like to kick off on that one.
Sure. I was just going to repurpose that, but you've exposed me now, Terri. But in all honesty, it is that, and I think that applies to any change. It is about baking it into the way you work, and I tend to look at organisations broadly in two different ways. There's the hard stuff, so the objectives, the way you do things, the meetings, the governments. Then there's the softer and, in my opinion, more powerful part around the culture and the behaviours and how we are to each other. And I think it's about baking it in on both fronts. So make it part of the culture, make it part of the DNA. And then also on the harder side, make it part of the governance process. Are you talking about the change and reviewing the change and celebrating the change in your governance meetings? So I'd say, both the hard side and the soft side.
Both together.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Aggie. Liz, what would you say for Transport for London?
I think that's right. You get it at all those touch points. And for us, I think what we found was just keeping it simple, and that power of that language of simple messages that are repeatable throughout. We are very good, and I'm guilty of myself, of making it incredibly complex with standards and competencies and guidance and and it's just, all it does is shows us off for our HR speak, really, but just simple phrases, simple things. One of the things that stuck, for example, is we wanted part of the station change program that we did was about trying to keep the enthusiasm and the vibrancy that we had from the Olympics and the buzz around that. And we just had that phrase, that let your personality shine. And I think, the great feedback we have about our customer services pre-lockdown is that, you can stand on a station and hear somebody rapping the announcements, or making a joke, or, saying a poem or whatever. And that's the quirkiness and the write this about London, and that just resonated, and it still is a phrase. So I'm really passionate about this, the power of simple language. It's like do the right thing. That's got stuff. It's, in our current situation, cliches almost now, like, the new normal and all the rest of it. Those are just, they invoke that exactly what you want them to say. So I think it's using language, keeping it simple.
Great examples, Liz. Thank you very much. Paul, what about you? How have you sustained the changes?
I think I like Aggie's term of baking it in. Without a doubt, change can't be a project forever, because it would have killed the project manager if that were the case. It needs to live and it needs to breathe all on its own. And what better way to do that is to identify those people in the organisation that are the early adopters, that are really showing the signs of behaviour and mindset that you're really looking for. We identified them as the pioneer group. And it's so much better to have peer-to-peer reinforcement than being pushed down. So if you get a groundswell at the bottom of the organisation, that is perfect to take this forward. And then it's simple little reinforcement messages along the way. So then we see the organisation moving in the direction that we desire it to go in. Not necessarily going the same route as we thought it would, but that's good, because the organisation will evolve with its people. And probably one of the other biggest findings that I've had is to make sure that we have success, is to make sure we measure it in the right way. So if we've got a new mindset and a new culture, don't measure it with the old tools, because all you're doing is reinforcing the behaviours you had before. And that needs some real good thought to go in. To make sure that your KPIs are driving the right behaviours and not allowing old behaviours to come back in.
Great point, Paul. Thank you. Yeah, so a number of great points there then. The baking it in, and I think it is these simple phrases that you can remember. So keep it simple, let your personality shine, measure success with new tools. You want it to live and breathe. And repeatable things, so that there's consistency and you're reinforcing it all the time. And I like the quirky bits in London Transport with the poetry, etc. I'd forgotten about that, so that was a nice reminder. There is a question from the audience. I've been so impressed with the changes in London for transport. I'm amazed at it's been amazing in this global crisis. So one thing that's happened to me through COVID is I've had to wear glasses at the computer, so apologies. Thinking of roadblocks and traffic slowing, controlling measures and bike lanes, it seems that many of the changes are sustainable and forward thinking and could be lasting, not just for COVID. If TfL are seeing these measures as short term, that needs to be reset. Are they trying to keep these changes and advance on them? Liz, any thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Roxy. That's great feedback. That's very kind of you. We had a mayor's transport strategy that was pushing us towards sustainable transport and actually getting people to use sustainable transport. I think we had 80% from 63% by 2041. That's been somewhat accelerated in the last 6 months. We're working on how we're going to move that forward. And actually, Roxy, I can, if you want to go onto our website, and there is a part of the website called Street Space London, and actually it's asking about which of those measures should be permanent, which should be ones that are temporary. So it's part of our consultation on that. So please, take part in that and provide us with the feedback of what you've liked. It's, as you can imagine, a very complex organisation with many stakeholders. We won't meet everybody's needs, but it'd be great if you joined in that conversation. Thank you for your question.
Great. It was actually Steph Curtis. Sorry, just to be. Oh no, a question from Roxy. You're right. It was Steph's the organizer. You're right. It was Roxy. Well spotted. Okay. So a final question then for anyone who wants to answer it. What were some of the unexpected things that have happened through this change for you? Any surprises?
I'll go first if you want me to, Terry.
You go, Paul.
Steve and Paul there.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Steve, I think, said something first, and then Paul, you next. Okay. So Stephen.
I was just going to say, sometimes you don't realise how far you've travelled, and I think to pause at a certain point, whether it's an anniversary or when you reach a milestone and look back at how far you've come or how much change there's been, is quite surprising at certain points.
Yeah, you do forget how far you've come, so it's good to stop and pause and look back and look forward. Great, thank you, Stephen. Paul?
I would build on that, and what surprised me is how much of having a clear purpose and rationale for change up front removes a lot of the roadblocks, and it's using clear, simple language that if people can understand without it being dressed up, more times out of 10, they're going to come on the journey with you. And what we found is that the people don't want to come on the journey wouldn't have come on the journey anyway, just no matter what we did. So from my point of view, definitely an advocate for being as clear and as transparent with the whole organisation as possible to get the right result for both the organisation and the people inside.
Great. Many thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo what you've just said there, Paul, because I think often when you're talking about change, there's a desire to quickly move to action or quickly move to start talking about it or start executing it. But to your point, I think it's really, really important to really establish and paint that clear picture of the outcome and the why and the rationale, because you do find that people come with you on that journey in such a beautiful way. And especially if you then enable them with the skills and the rationale behind it as well. People, my surprise, a beautiful surprise, is how amazing people are really and how engaged they can be and how they can be really supportive if they get the why, they know how they fit into it, and they've been enabled with the skills.
Yeah, great summary. Liz, any surprises for you?
I don't know why it should be a surprise, but it did hit me as and I did this as coming into a new organisation, so you don't always know the reaction that you're going to get. A very risk-adverse, because I say organisation, but the anticipation of the change was so much harder than the actual change itself. So one of the big parts of our change programme was to shut all our ticket offices, and everybody go, oh no, London will fall apart if we can't go to a person and buy a ticket, when actually only 3% of our people bought tickets from a ticket office. But as soon as they closed, despite the media focus and all the rest of it, it was fine and it was okay, and actually I don't know quite how you get around that next time, but it was more, as I say, the anticipation of the change, the actual change was less of an impact than I think people thought.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of I think some of you were saying earlier as well about how the change has happened much quicker because we've been forced into it. So things that would have taken months, years even, seem to have just happened really quickly because we've had to. The urgency that you talked about at the beginning, there's a real need to change quickly and just get on with it. And what we're doing now, for example, I mean, that would never have happened last year even, maybe, not in the same extent that it seems to be happening now. So we've adapted very quickly. So yeah, so I think just a few, we've got a minute or two just to wrap things up. So I was just going to say, I'm just checking 5 5 minutes to end, Terri. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. So I'll do a quick summary of 1 or 2 points, and then if you've got any other thoughts, please chip in. So about the ability to step back and reflect on where we've come from, because I know often when I've worked with leaders, you know, they're so lost in what they're doing, and then if you just step back and say, well, this is where we started a year ago, go, oh my gosh, did we really do all of that in the last year? So it's, you know, and even if you just do it for a few months, it is amazing how far you can come. Being clear and transparent so people really understand the why for themselves and the why for the organization. Yeah, and I very much work with making sure everyone knows what their strengths are so they know how best to contribute to the changes that need to be made, and so that they can really do their best work. And I'm struck by, Aggie, your use of the word beautiful. You've used it a few times. It's really a beautiful thing. So it's a powerful word, actually, which I don't often hear used in business. So I'm just noticing that. Yeah, so bringing people along on the journey with you. And the anticipation of change can be much harder than the actual reality of it. So I guess we can make things become a really big thing in our heads. And it's linked to that complicated way that we can go about things sometimes. And I think what this has shown us is that we can do things in a much simpler way sometimes. Just simple language, simple instructions. Not that it's all simple by any means, but we can translate it in a way that's more understandable and easier for people to work with. So any final comments before we wrap up and move on to the next session? No? Said everything you want to say? Well, I just want to say thank you very much for a great panel discussion. We whizzed through a lot of different questions there, and I'm sure if people have any questions, they can come back and ask us. Feel free to put them in the chat box. We will come back to them if we haven't answered them here today. And so thank you, Stephen, Aggie, Liz and Paul. Wish you well on the rest of your journey of change.